Hello, and welcome to the second Town of Oakville Special Council meeting of March 26, 2020, taking place electronically with the members of council in the council chamber, myself. To ensure that we record the members present, I'd like to acknowledge that present at the meeting are, besides myself, Councillor Adams, Chisholm, Duddick, Elgar, Giddings, Grant, Hazlitt Thiel, Knoll, Lischina, Longo, O'Meara, Palmer, Robertson, and Sanju. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest to be declared? Raise your hand if you have one. I have hand waving from Councillor Duddick. Councillor Duddick cannot hear. Madam Clerk? They're working on it. Well, nobody said electronic would be easy. Councillor Duddick would like to be unmuted, Clerk. Councillor Duddick, you appear to be unmuted. Can you hear?
I can hear.
Thank you. Councillor Adams, was your problem solved now too? Councillor Adams. Can you unmute Councillor Adams? Councillor Adams, can you hear now? Madam Clerk, can you unmute them all?
Oh, I can hear you, and you can hear me.
Yes, I can. So the clerks attempted, for the orderliness of the meeting, to use the mute all button, and apparently it mutes everything, including me. So we are all unmuted, and the clerk is going to have to rely on our usual courteous behavior. All right, are we ready to go? Please raise your hand if there's a problem remaining for you hearing. Councillor Duddick, what is your problem?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, so if there's a problem, raise your hand. I see no hands. All right. I asked if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest to be declared. Raise your hand if you have one. Madam Clerk, there are no declarations of pecuniary interest. Council, the first item on our agenda is the update regarding town operations by Acting CAO Jane Closey. And CAO Closey is now at the central podium. Raise your hands if you have a problem hearing her when she begins speaking. Otherwise, I will ask you to raise your hands when she's done to ask any questions you may have.
Mayor and members of council, we're just getting the presentation up on the screen.
So, your worship, it's Councillor O'Meara. Can I make a suggestion that individual councillors mute their own personal microphones unless they're speaking? Otherwise, we hear all the background noise and stuff that they may be doing in their offices.
Let me second the councillor's suggestion. Everybody, please mute your mic. I have at your end, I believe that you can still hear when you do that. Councillor Duddick, please raise your hand if you can still hear me. Councillor Duddick? Yes, so Councillor Duddick has self-muted and she can still hear me. So Councillor Giddings, can you mute your mic? There you go. Because of the way this displays to me, the rest of you have scrolled off, so I can't hear any background noise, so I'll assume everybody has complied. Commissioner, you are up, and we are eager for your report.
Mayor and members of council, I just wanted to provide you a brief update in terms of what town staff have put in place during this emergency. First of all, the key principles that have been guiding our approach to this emergency are, first of all, to implement the advice of the federal, provincial, regional health facilities in terms of reducing the spread of COVID-19. That certainly helps us protect our community overall. It also helps us limit the impact onto the hospitals. So that is by far the primary principle that has governed how we have been operating over the last number of weeks. We are, as in line with that, protecting the health and safety of our employees in the workplace, and we're also identifying actions for businesses from the economic impact of this pandemic. And Dorothy St. George will speak more to that in her presentation later on. So you know this well, but just in terms of a short background, I think the first case in Canada was in January 25th of 2020. The pandemic, of course, was officially declared by the World Health Organization in about mid-March. It was alerted by almost all the public health authorities throughout the world in terms of its impact. And that led to a state of emergency that was declared by the province around March 13th, I think it was, actually 17th, and then by the region and town on March 23rd. And that, of course, was to primarily reduce the spread, raise the awareness of the seriousness of this issue, so that people recognized. I think we've all heard Prime Minister Trudeau say over and over again, stay home. And so that message was driven home by the state of emergency that was declared by the region and the town. The town has been practicing our emergency planning since early or mid-January, when we saw what was happening in the world as a whole. We looked at monitoring the situation that was going on, and since then we've moved into much more enhanced monitoring and taking actions. We have put in place most of our community or continuity plans for each of our departments throughout the town in the last short while, actually for about the last month. So in terms of the key actions that we've taken for the community, we, as you know, have closed all of our facilities. We have no recreation libraries open at all. In fact, all access to every town facility has been closed to the public. So all the non-essential programs have been discontinued and shut down, and that is to last until April the 5th. We started very early with our senior centers, quickly followed with the closing of our recreational centers well before the province mandated that, and then continued the following week with the closure of the consolidation, first of all, within Town Hall, and then the complete closure of Town Hall to the public. As you know, we've closed the parks, the playgrounds, the skateboards, the basketball courts, the dog parks. Those are all closed to the public. This has been certainly a difficult message to get across. We've heard from lots of people, not only the councillors, but from the public, that people are still gathering in the parks, playing sports, organized sports. Those things all are precluded by now what is a mandatory requirement from the federal government. So we are trying to get that message out in all of our correspondence, and we do have municipal enforcement officers that are certainly ensuring that the people disperse through those areas as we come upon them. Transit, as you're aware, we've implemented a modified schedule, very similar to the Sunday schedule. We've also limited access is not permitted through the front door, it's only through the rear door. As a result, there are no fees required there's no transit fare that's going to be required at all. As I spoke before, the state of emergency really is it's a good attempt to highlight the urgency of this pandemic. Communications and Service Oakville is continuing to provide service 7 days a week. We've responded to a number of questions. I do need to say, though, that our questions at our Service Oakville has considerably dropped down. So we actually have had some preliminary conversations with the region on how we could perhaps provide more support to their 311, which is certainly handling most of the health impact questions. And of course, the mayor has formed the Economic Task Force, and Dorothy will speak to that in a moment. So those are some of the key actions that we've put in place for the community. The other key actions that we've put in place are directed specifically at our employees. So we've done deep cleaning and sanitizing of all our facilities. In fact, that had started immediately after they were closed. Some actually had begun before then. So every facility throughout the town has now been cleaned, and we continue to clean them as staff are still in, some of the essential staff are still in those buildings. Excuse me, so non-essential staff actually have been sent home They are paid up into their schedule hours, and that takes place until April the 5th. Essential work that can be done at home is certainly encouraged to be doing at home, and we have facilitated staff in many ways in terms of equipment in order so that they can carry on the work at home in their own offices. We have taken into consideration many initiatives to limit the impact on staff in terms of their the attendance management program is one that we try and monitor and measure our attendance over time. We've exempted them out of that program, especially when they have any kind of respiratory illness during this time. So we've done a number of initiatives to try and ensure that we've protected the staff and yet given them useful things to do over this time period. So, in terms of next steps, there are some fundamental questions we need to ask ourselves after all of these pieces are in place until April the 5th. We have some fundamental questions to ask ourselves that we will be doing over this week and informing you of where we go from here. Our first question is, what are all the essential and critical services that we're going to be able to sustain beyond the April the 5th date? What is the time frame to start to bring back some of those essential services? What types of capital projects can proceed given the delay that's already happened, and what could we actually move on to 2021? And when do we really start to consider the recovery initiatives? For us, we haven't gotten a very clear direction yet, likely because it's just simply not possible from the public health groups in terms of how long this would last. So we need to understand that time frame to some extent so that we know when we can start to bring back the programs in place. So those are a number of questions we're asking ourselves over the next week in order to determine what we do come April the 6th when the current essential services time frame is ended. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, just be patient, council, for a second while I ask the clerk to put the gallery view back up on my monitor. Thank you, clerk. If you raise your hand in front of your device, I will take down those who have questions. And all right, I have a list. Councillor Duddick. You need to unmute your mic.
There. My question pertains to people who are not abiding by the self-isolation after a trip. Who do they report to?
Who do they report to was the last part of that question?
Yeah, meaning a neighbor who sees them.
Oh, so I understand the federal government has just enacted a quarantine act, which now mandates the self-isolation of those individuals with fairly substantial fines that go with it. I think that at this point in time, the only advice that we could give is that they should be contacting the police. They're best in the position to lay the fines.
Thank you.
Councillor Lischina, unmute your mic.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And Jane, thank you so much for all of your work through this critical time. You mentioned initially about continuity plans and that you've been working through those since the beginning of January. Has there been any major issues that you've had to change any of those plans?
I would say no. The continuity plans were in fairly good shape. We had been working on them well in the fall, as you may remember, in order to get ready for some other issues that we may have faced. So they were in fairly good shape. I think what's benefited us all is every time you use a continuity plan, you see where you can make improvements, but there were no drastic improvements that we needed to completely rethink.
Thank you, Councillor Lischina. The next is Councillor Sanju. Please unmute your mic.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. And thank you to everybody for taking the time today. And thank you so much for CEO Kosi. Just a quick question, and I may have missed this just because I was off the meeting for a second. My Zoom crashed. But I wanted to know about the capital projects and just projects generally in the town. Do you foresee things delaying for a significant amount of time? You were saying that potentially we would kind of reevaluate things in 2021. Do you feel like that's going to change all construction projects in town?
So the construction projects that are currently underway, most of those are still underway, so they will continue to proceed unless, of course, the contractor runs into other concerns, which we have not to date. I think there's one stormwater project that has been shut down by the contractor because of some issues they're running into. But generally, the projects that have already started, we're looking at continuing those ones. Our focus in looking at the capital plan is looking at the projects that have not yet started. Do we go out with tenders? Do we know that we can get it done in that particular year, or should we hold back on some of those into 2021? So that's been most of the focus on the capital plan.
Thank you, Councillor. If you have another question, please unmute your mic and ask it. Councillor Sanju. Councillor Sanju's mic is now unmuted. Councillor Sanju.
Now it is, thank you. So just on top of that, I just wanted to double check from a contractual perspective, are we going to then be relying on any force majeure constituency plans, or sorry, any plans that we have in our contractual obligations to ensure that we're not on the hook for additional construction projects?
So I'm actually going to ask that either Jim Barry or Doug Carr respond to that question. We have set up a contractors group among staff so that we can continually evaluate the capital programs, and that's a specific question that they've been addressing.
Excellent, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. To this point, we do not consider any delays force majeure. Construction has been identified as an essential service by the province and something to continue. So anything to do, if a contractor were to consider claiming force majeure as a result of the pandemic, it wouldn't be included in the contract.
Do we have any understanding of what our potential obligations will be, or we just don't know yet?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't believe at this point we would have obligations. We would be advising that it's not a force majeure. They're just not complying with their end of the contract. Non-compliance. Okay, thank you. That answers my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. The next councillor is Councillor Pavan Parmer. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, CEO Kosi, for your presentation. My question is around the municipal enforcement in our parks. You mentioned that it's been difficult relaying that message to our residents and keeping residents and specifically youth out of the parks. I'm hearing a lot from residents in terms of it's still playing basketball. And I just wanted to know, you said municipal enforcement is out there, but can residents still call in and tip off municipal enforcement? And what kind of enforcement is taking place?
So I will ask for Jim Barry to add to this, but I'll start by saying that the ability for us to lay any fines relative to the ignoring the social distancing or physical social distancing is difficult because of course, bylaw enforcement officers don't have the ability to ask for ID and those types of things. So it is something I know had come up at the regional council meeting yesterday that still needs to be sorted out in terms of with the police in terms of who can actually lay the fine itself. So the role that we're playing in the meantime is certainly call in to Service Oakville, let us know where those things are occurring. Our municipal enforcement officers are out and about throughout the community, and where they see them, they are going to ask the people that are congregating to disperse. And so that's in the interim until we have some clarity in terms of the fining piece and who is to be called. That's the approach that we're taking.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. The next councillor is Councillor Chisholm. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question, Jane, and thank you very much for your presentation. And I know it's a very trying time for staff and so forth, and I congratulate all of you who are still on the front line. With respect to transit, the question, I've had a couple calls and concerns about Caravan. Could you tell me what, if their service has been eliminated or reduced with Caravan? The reason I'm asking that question is I've had one resident who was very upset that they can't get to the bank, to their bank through Caravan. And she's been told that that service is no longer available. Could you comment on that, please?
No, the caravan service is still available. We have put in place some screening questions that we would ask people, just to make sure that it's safe for them to use the service. But the caravan service is still in place.
And just to follow up on that, so the ability for Caravan to take this elderly lady to the bank is still feasible?
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I would suggest that if there's a difficulty encountered by her or any other resident, that a councillor advise the resident or to call Service Oakville about it and or call Service Oakville on behalf of the resident. The next councillor is Councillor Haslett-Thiel. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, please unmute your mic. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, please unmute your mic. Go ahead.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Okay, so Dave and I had a joint list, so I'm going to start at the bottom of that and see how we do. Can you, first of all, as everyone is saying, thank you so much for keeping us informed and for caring for the community and for all of the staff. There's been a question in regards to the harbors and what and when they would know potentially if the boats will be put in the water. Do you have any comment on that?
I would actually ask Commissioner Bell to respond to that question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've been in constant contact with our boating community. What the staff are doing right now is we are working on putting in docks and anchors. However, at this time, we have not made a decision on when the boat launch would actually take place. We are following the direction of public health around congregation, so we will be waiting to see what further direction comes out from them.
Thank you for that. You might as well stay at the podium. I think these are all for you. We've had questions in regards to spring loose leaf pickup and whether or not that is something that would be done this spring under the circumstances.
So with respect to loose leaf pickup, we will not be doing it this spring. However, residents do have the opportunity to use the regular regional service that is still fully in place.
So could I just ask that that get posted on the website? So because it's people are starting to go outside and do some of that work and get them a heads up that they can bag it would be great.
Service Oakville was already notified this morning, and there will be a Q&A going up on the website today.
Thank you. In terms of, and I'm not sure who can answer this question, I think some of us have been getting repeated questions about whether or not our staff and our first responders, and then on a broader level, just Halton Healthcare, if they have sufficient personal protective equipment, and could somebody just confirm the status of the inventory so that put some minds at ease if we do have sufficient?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the whole issue of PPE was originally reviewed back in January, and we ensured that we had stockpiles available for all of our staff once we realized that this might be a more serious problem. We review our inventories on a daily basis and put in bulk orders as required. So yes, all of our staff have full PPE.
Okay, And in terms of the Halton Healthcare Network, is there anybody there that could answer the question about whether the hospital has all that they need in terms of personal protective equipment?
No, we couldn't answer that question. That would have to be answered directly either by the region or the hospital itself. And I just wanted to add on the PPE for the town, we are abiding by the information we've received from the public health, the medical officer of health, in relation to the extent to which we need to be using PPE equipment, which is generally fairly limited. For our fire department, there may be some relevance to that. For our caravan, transporting specialized service that we provide, there may be some changes in that. But overall, there's limited requirements for us to use PPE within our town staff.
Thank you for clarifying that. I have one other question, and that is just in reference to your comment that the staff that are now at home, safe and sound, and that they have, some of them are able to work, some of them may not. Is there been thought to using and doing some clean work and some of that service process improvement work, given that some of them, lots of them are still healthy, thank heavens, and it's work that keeps them feeling engaged and productive?
So at this point in time, we are on essential or critical services. In order to introduce that or other elements into the work, actually, we need to evaluate that because it doesn't just pull in the one person that may be doing, for example, you use the process mapping, it may also pull in our IT department and others into the overall piece that they're working on. So at this point in time, we're delivering our essential and critical services only. Where, and I'll give an example where a person can work independently on a project that they've been working on, they could take that home and continue to work through that. But anything that allows collaboration, it is difficult for us at this point in time to deliver it given the impact of other staff.
So will it be investigated as things progress and you evaluate the sustainability of some of the essential services?
It will be, and that's one of the questions we need to deal with for after April 5th.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Knoll, you are next. Would you please unmute your mic and ask your question?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. The first one is with respect to an email that went out a few days ago on the reduced transit schedule, or as it was referred to as the modified Sunday schedule. There was a concern about being able to provide transportation for healthcare workers. Was that resolved? And I apologize if I missed it in a subsequent email, but I didn't see a resolution to it.
So they are evaluating, they have been in contact with the hospital, as well as the region in addition in terms of what key transit routes are required. And so they are working through the schedule changes in order to accommodate that. It takes about 2 weeks to work through that schedule change, and so that's happening now so that we can bring it up as soon as possible.
Terrific.
And we'll notify you actually when it has come up with a change in that schedule.
Okay. The second issue is following up on the caravan question. With the reduced transit schedule, has the caravan dispatch schedule been changed?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the only change to the caravan procedures has been to ask people at the time of booking whether or not they're displaying any symptoms of COVID. Other than that, it's status quo.
So they're still able to request caravan trips in the same daily schedule that they would normally?
Yes, they are, unless they're displaying signs of COVID.
Perfect, thank you. With respect to staff wellness, I know that this is stressful on everybody. Is our EAP program still in force for our staff? Are they able to access that if they are having challenges?
Yes, it is, and actually we've been communicating. We've had several emails go out to all of staff, and that is one piece where we are communicating out to them. It is certainly in place.
And I'm assuming being used. I got an email this morning from planning staff regarding the development at 291 Queens Avenue, and referred to the fact that the commenting period ends on March 30th. And I'm wondering if that provincial legislation that was passed, that thought to reset planning date, I'm concerned that requiring that a comment period end in the midst of this, that's not really fair to the public.
That's correct. All the time periods were suspended or postponed by that regulation that was approved by the province. So this normal time frames for planning applications, for building permit requirements, heritage applications have all been suspended or postponed.
Terrific. Can you circle back with staff on 291 Queens then? Because we are, according to this email, at 10:33 this morning, still looking at a March 30th comment period deadline.
Certainly,
And
we'll
I
do
just
that.
don't want, I want to make sure the public are going to still have access to be able to write comments this is all over.
Certainly, we'll do that.
Thank you, Matt Dale. Thank you, as everybody else has said to you for your work, and I apologize in advance. I've been annoying you with my questions, but good job to all of them. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, everyone. Are there other questions? If so, raise your hand. Let me just make a little list. Keep your hands up, please. And I'll have two lists, first-timers and second-timers. The next questioner is Councillor Robertson. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you. Thank you for this. My first question is regarding the demolition projects in of our home. We've had concerns about how close the construction workers are to each other at the project at Bronte Athletic Field.
Excuse me, Councillor. Your voice is, it's transmitting but breaking up. Can you speak closer to your microphone, not necessarily louder, just closer?
We'll try.
We'll see.
The question regards Bronte Athletic Field and how close the construction workers are to one another.
The question is about the I'm checking to see if I heard you correctly.
Right.
The question is about construction at the Bronte Athletic Field. Is that correct?
Yes, and how close the construction workers are to one another.
And the piece about construction workers is a little unclear. I'm guessing, though, that you're asking if proper distances and so on are being maintained?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner?
So through you, Mr. Chair, all of the construction projects that are still underway throughout the town, all of the general contractors have been contacted by staff and have been directed to have COVID-friendly procedures in place to ensure that social distancing is being maintained wherever possible. So we can certainly follow back up with the contractor at BA, but every single contractor has been contacted with respect to this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I
Councillor.
will take the question for later.
Thank you, Councillor. Then the next councillor to ask a question will be Councillor Elgar. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Okay, I think it's unmuted now.
You're right.
Okay, the question is, people returning from the United States are self-isolating, but I'm being asked, can they still walk on the streets if they keep their distance? Or the sidewalks or trails?
So as I understand, they must self-isolate in their home.
Okay.
That would be a question we could ask of public health and get a message out to clarify. I'm pretty confident that is the answer, though.
Okay, actually, the email just came in, so that's what made me send it. Next question is, April 5th, is that some magic date? Or I kind of got the gut feel this will go on a long time. Do you have any inkling on that?
So I would agree with you. That's where we are landing, and I think we're hearing a lot of that from the provincial government in terms of their announcements that are coming out, as well as the federal government. The April 5th date was set really by the closure of the schools until that date. So most municipalities, including ourselves, put in action our essential services until that date. That is going to be our challenge over the next few days, really, and into next week, is what do we do come April the 6th. So we are working on that now, and we'll determine with you what will be available come April the 6th.
I appreciate that. I got a feeling we're not going to see a lot of change for the better.
I would tend to agree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Giddings, you are next. Would you unmute your mic and ask your question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Regarding the meeting we're having today on a remote basis, would we be able to have one similar for the Heritage Advisory Committee? So that would work?
First, through you, Mr. Mayor, we are evaluating what services we can continue with. So that is first analysis that we'd have to do. Second is that with the regulations that are approved by the province, there are no time limitations that would be applicable to the heritage matters. So secondly, there is no need or requirement to hold those meetings. We can hold those meetings similar to this one. So at this point in time, I don't have a clear answer for you, because I think we first need to determine, is that an essential service that we want to continue to provide? And we'll have an answer for you that as we sort out what happens come April the 6th.
I appreciate your answer. Perhaps we could go through the agenda with construction allowing to continue. There may be some residents in queue that are waiting to be able to get approval to start that construction. So I'll leave that with you. My other question is, with construction being allowed to continue, where are we in terms of home inspections in support of the Ontario Building Code?
So at this point in time, we had not put back in inspections. We needed to, one, evaluate what was our ability to deliver that by staff. We are now looking at how we could reintroduce some of those services. Construction is an essential service as identified by the province, so we want to be able to continue to provide as much as possible in order to allow people to continue with their construction. There is one area that we are still struggling with in terms of how we can accommodate, and that's inspections that are in occupied homes, because that creates both, predominantly a risk for our own staff in terms of entering those types of residents. So I think you'll see over the next short while our reintroducing inspections, but only specific ones, the ones that we can ensure that we've protected staff from any of the COVID issues.
Thank you for that. How do we have people reach out? Would that be through Service Oakville or through yourself to advise that the house is empty, or whether they could FaceTime action or supply pictures?
So we have an inspection service through our building department. I would actually start with Service Oakville. It is the most reliable source in terms of staff that are manned and there and available. So any inquiries like that should come in through Service Oakville.
All right, thank you. And as for my colleagues' indulgence, I just wondered more. Do you have any plans in place for renters that may be renting town commercial space or residential space?
So at this point in time, anyone who is renting space, for example, in our facilities that we've actually closed, we will be looking at giving some type of rebate, because obviously they can't even use the space if it's already closed. The ones that certainly can continue with their rent, we would still continue with the rental arrangement we have with them. The federal and provincial government are coming out with a number of programs that could assist those those tenants. And in order to actually offer any type of reduction in the rent, the town really needs to look at some of our overall financial impacts in order to see whether or not that's the priority to offer, or are there other things that we would want to consider. So we are looking at continuing the rental arrangements that we currently have in those facilities that can be occupied.
All right, thank you. I've received a number of calls from commercial businesses that have been closed by the province. And they're saying they can't operate. How do we expect them to pay their taxes? So depending on what happens with deferring or interest later on, is that something that we direct them to the province?
The province and the federal government, in terms of the economic incentives that they're coming out with, yes, I would direct them in those two locations.
All right, and for clarity, one of your answers earlier, I think from Councillor Robertson, was about people congregating in public. Do those complaints or those go through Service Oakville as well?
Yeah, okay. So for those ones, I think we're still in the process of determining, so if people are congregating, yes, certainly through Service Oakville. And we will do what we can about sending out our municipal enforcement. So at the present time, that's the process we're taking. If there's anything further to that, as we get some more clarity around, because there are fines that are available, we'll let you know how we can, how alternative means would be. So for right now, contact Service Oakville.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. The next councillor to ask questions is Councillor O'Meara. Councillor O'Meara, please unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Two questions. The first one pertains to our municipal debt and our regulations provincially. How are we going to tackle next year? And then my second question is just when we are going to further define the list of essential services that are under those provincial categories.
So the first question, in terms of, as you all know, we can't operate our facilities out of debt or go into debt for those. This is something we're actively looking at right now. So I don't have an answer for you in terms of the implications. We are certainly looking at that. The area treasurers throughout the region actually are meeting to sort out what are the potential things that we could put in place, and what's the magnitude of the impact. So I don't have an answer on that side of it. In terms of, and you have to help me, what was the second question?
When are you going to decide what to add back?
Oh, in terms of the
it was the list of essential services.
Mm-hmm. I think after the, so we have reviewed the provincial list. The provincial list is actually quite extensive. We could almost add back all of our services. So we're viewing that list as what you could have available. We're looking at it in terms of what should we have available while we're continuing to curb the spread of COVID, protect our employees, and protect the community. So we hope to come out later this week with a revised list of essential services.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. To add to the answer on your first question about how we're going to proceed with regard to debt and deficit, in the meeting that the mayors of Ontario had with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and the Minister of Finance Tuesday morning, I'll summarize it this way. They made it very clear that they are crystal clear about what their role and our role are under the statutes. And I think it would be fair to say, they thanked us for understanding that we need to stay in our lane. And to quote the minister verbatim, you must take your lead. So these are his exact words. You must take your lead from the province. So if that, I think that helps us clarify what our role is. And And I thank you for your question, and I hope, oh, and the other thing is, the Minister of Finance indicated that they are keeping track of the costs that municipalities are sending in to to the Government of Ontario to keep them abreast of our expenditures and our losses, and more is coming. The measures announced in the legislature, passed by the legislature, were the start, not the end, of what the province is doing. Thank you. I hope that helps. The next question is from Councillor Sanju. Councillor Sanju, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you, Member Burton. Just a quick question. I think somebody else went back and asked a little bit about staff's well-being right now. I know that we're moving to a work-from-home schedule as much as we can for folks that are able to work from home from staff perspective, but I wanted to understand if we were doing any kind of check-ins from a mental health perspective. It can be tough on folks working from home, and I wanted to see if we have any planning in place from an HR perspective.
So I would actually ask Julie Clark to address this question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, so our staff who are at home, we are encouraging managers and supervisors to connect in daily. Just a touch point, doesn't have to be long, and we are about to launch some new tools through our Oakville Learn, that's our online learning system, to help staff with, things to think about when you work from home, what to do, what not to do, actions management should be taking, just to really re-emphasize the importance of that daily check-in. And of course, as I think it was Councillor Knoll that mentioned earlier, our EAP program is up and running, and we are constantly encouraging staff to use those resources.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
The next question is from Councillor Lischina. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Am I unmuted?
We can hear you. You're audible.
Great, thank you. There have been a number of questions already about transit. My specific one is about Home to Hub. Have we expanded that service, considering we've had to change a number of routes, and obviously there's very different circumstances with people using it, so I'm just wondering about the Home to Hub, please.
Yeah, I'd ask Colleen Bell to deal with that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Home to Hub is fully available. We have not expanded it at this time because there has not been an increase in demand, but should that change, we would take a very serious look at that.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, Council, if that's all the questions, Councillor Grant is next. Councillor Grant, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Sorry, this.
Yes, you are audible.
This would be a stay in your lane question, but as we're considering giving relief to property owners who are homeowners, essentially, are we also looking towards what we're doing with the mom and pop renters, the mom and pops who own buildings rent out? I know that a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck aren't getting paychecks. We do have a rent deadline coming up for a number of people, and I know that at least in my ward, there's a couple of property owners who are wondering if they don't get paid by their renters, how are they going to meet any kind of deferral payment at all? And again, this might be a stay in our lane, maybe it's a higher level of commitment, but as we're considering deferral, I thought that might be something to bring up.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we are not considering at this point in time any relief to those to the renters, certainly of town facilities. I think it is a question more at the provincial and federal government because they are coming up with a number of programs, so that is one area. The second is, I think from the town properties and the town facilities, we really need to get a handle on what's our overall impact from this before we start to bring on various programs. So that we would wait till much later, if at all, because the federal and provincial government are bringing forward many programs.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. The next question is from Councillor Haslett Thiel. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
My question is around a standard question I get almost every day, like 3 times or more a day. We have residents who are saying, how can I help? And while I know my partner, Councillor Giddings, and I talked to them about the valuable role they play in connecting with their neighbors safely and physical distancing and tap, not cash, and all of those elements, they're also asking, on a broader scale, is there anything else that they can do? And it speaks to not only who we are as a community, but makes people feel better to help. Is there any advice you have for us around answering that question beyond what I've just described?
Actually, your suggestions out to the community to check in on their neighbors, the people that are self-isolating, is probably the best example or the best advice you can give them at this point in time. I know there's been a number of suggestions of people providing material or supplies to hospitals, as an example. I think the hospital is still trying to deal with their delivery system and the requirement for certified equipment. And actually, this question was asked at Regional Council yesterday. And I had understood the question from Jane McCaskill, the CAO at the region, was that she was going to look into more of the opportunities for the community assisting and advise through that. So as we get that advice, we'll certainly pass it through to all of council if CAO McCaskill has not already.
You can also
we'd appreciate getting that information. Thanks very much.
It is also not a bad idea, if you would like, you can direct people looking for ways to help to at least 2 sources. The Hospital Foundation, the Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital Foundation, has opportunities on their website for people to help. And the Oakville Community Foundation has canvassed their charities for ways that those charities in Oakville are looking for help. And so those are 2 ways you can help people find ways to satisfy their need to be helpful. Thank you, everybody. Now, for the sake of the orderliness of the meeting, we just by coincidence have 14. We have a need during this meeting for 14 movers and seconders, and if you don't object, I would like to, on your behalf, just choose in alphabetical order the movers and seconders. And when I do that, if you object, raise your hand, and I'll ask for another. But the motion now before us is to receive this information, and subject to your agreement, the mover and seconders are Councillor Adams and Councillor Chisholm. Is there any objection? Is there any objection to receiving this information? Madam Clerk, the motion carries. Council, the next item is the report from the Finance Department on the COVID-19 pandemic property tax assistance, and Nancy Sully is here to present this.
Same presentation. Okay, so slide 8. There, okay, good now. Sorry, which one? Okay, thank you. Okay. Through you, Mayor Burton, I just wanted to provide a brief update on the financial impact of COVID-19 on the town, and then get into the property tax relief that we are proposing. So the slide showing right now is from our 2020 budget, and it's really just a reminder of our revenue sources for the town. Our 2020 budget had $345.5 million in revenue. We are required to have a balanced budget, so that matches the expenditures that were approved as part of the 2020 budget. And as CAO Clohessy mentioned, we are required to have a balanced budget. Debt issuance, we cannot issue debt to fund our operations, so if we have a shortfall in revenue, we will have to look at our expenses to offset that. So these are some of the key revenue sources for the town that could be impacted with the current situation. Taxation represents about 60% of our overall town revenues. Our activity revenue is about 21%. And then our investment income, while it's a much smaller number, a good portion of that stays in our operating budget and the balance goes into our reserves to help fund our capital program. And then our penalty and interest on taxes, I just wanted to acknowledge that we do budget penalty and interest on taxes in our budget, so any mitigation measures that we take will impact that budget. So we are starting from a very strong financial position. However, we are already starting to see some of the impacts on the town revenue sources due to the reduction in services. We've looked at our operations and assumed that many of our facilities wouldn't be able to open until the end of April. And based on that, we're looking at about an $8 million revenue loss, close to $1 million a week. The largest impact will be, of course, on recreation and culture with all of our facilities closed. Planning and development, we've estimated about $1.7 million. We are cognizant that that is not necessarily lost revenue because development applications will eventually be processed. What we don't know at this time is what the economic impact of this will be on the country and how quickly that revenue might be realized. Our transit revenue, we receive about $700,000 a month in transit fare revenue. Of course, with the rear door boarding right now, there is no revenue coming in, so we've estimated that at about $1.4 million. And our parking with the waiving of parking fees as about $0.6 million. And then with the recommendations today on our penalty and interest and taxes for 2 months, it would work out to about $650,000. And then there's various other revenue losses throughout the town. So we do collect for not only ourselves, but also the region and the school boards. We do have multiple payment options for residents. We have pre-authorized payment, we have online banking, there are some mortgage company payments, etc. Our next due date is April the 24th, and we have the opportunity now to intervene and waive the penalty on that due date. We're also recommending that we would waive the penalty on any arrears that are currently on those tax accounts. We do have the liquidity to make that up, so we can cover ourselves. We've been spending a lot of time looking at our cash flow, looking at different scenarios and modeling the impacts of the revenue loss on our books, as well as how to balance that. We have a fair bit of cash on hand. The further we go, though, we'll have to look at the broader impacts. So our investment income, we rely on that cash flow. We invest it while we have it here. The longer this goes on, we'll lose some of that revenue. If we have to make payments to others, we still have to fund all of that as well. So we are very pleased to hear that the province has acknowledged the issue that we have and has delayed our payment to them on June the 30th for 90 days. That will assist us a great deal. But I do also want to remind Council that all of our tax bills do have to be billed in 2020. So while we would be deferring penalty and interest or waiving penalty and interest, we still will have to bill those taxes this year. I should also acknowledge that in our report, we are recommending the waiving of penalty. We haven't put any recommendations in on what might happen with our final billing. That billing would take place in early May, and our installments are June and September. We wanted to wait until we understand better the impact of the federal and provincial announcements, as well as the overall impact that this is having on our finances, and we would be bringing forward any recommendations to Council at a later date. The other thing, just to acknowledge, as area treasurers, we are meeting weekly on conference calls to discuss some of these issues, and we are looking at this really to get a consistent approach. And so I think you saw that with Regional Council this week, where they recognized the lower tier municipalities looking to waive penalty and interest. And as a result of that, Regional Council did defer our payment to them until June 30th. So that really greatly assists us in our cash flow. So we are recommending the waiving of our May 1st and our June 1st penalty and interest. This is really similar to a tax deferral. We're not specifically deferring the due date, but what it does allow is for those that are able to pay to go ahead and pay us. And the ones that aren't able can defer their payments, and there would be no penalty and interest on that until June 30th. We think this is the best option, as there are many residents that will want to continue to make their payments, and it also recognizes the significant impact this is having on our residents and our businesses. For those residents that would like to remove themselves from our pre-authorized payment program, we are recommending that they be eligible to do that as long as they let us know by the 15th of the month. So for the April 30th payment, if they didn't want us to take that out automatically, if they let us know by the 15th of April, we would take them out of the program. We are appreciative of the province, as I said, deferring the June 30th payment. We are making the payment for March 31st. That's $37.3 million, and that will come out of our account on Monday. As well, as I mentioned, Regional Council deferred their April 30th payment. So the report has 7 recommendations. Council may wish to remove recommendation 6 now that the province has made their announcement, as this one would no longer be relevant. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sully. Can I have the gallery view, Madam Clerk? Thank you. Can you hold your hands up for me to get a speakers list going here? Thank you, everybody. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you very much for the report. A couple of questions. First of all, would there be, based on the proposal, would there be a process to advise the town that a taxpayer wants to take the deferral option? Or would it just be, would they just be able to not pay and the interest not assessed?
Through you, Mayor Burton, they would just not pay and there would be no penalty or interest charged to their account.
Okay, with respect to the EAP program, you said it requires, I guess, a notification by the 15th of the month of the payment. What about those that are stressed out about their March 30th point? Because I know that, you're not hearing me?
No, I can, we can hear, oh, sorry.
Oh, Talia can't hear me. So with respect to people that are concerned with their March 30th payment because they're already working with the cash flow, can that be stopped, or would we simply, would we waive any NSF fees as a result?
Councillor and
stop payment?
Ms. Sully, let me check. Raise your hand, any councillor who did not understand the question. Ms. Sully, would you repeat the question you're going to be answering? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Burton. So the question was, for those residents or ratepayers that are concerned about their March 31st pre-authorized payment, that file had already been sent to the bank. So what we have been advising residents is that if they want it stopped, they should contact their bank. If they do, if it goes through and there is an NSF, if it gets returned, the report does recommend that we would waive any NSF charges, so they wouldn't be penalized for that.
Okay, terrific. How are we going to actively encourage people that can pay their taxes to actually pay their taxes? For the community, will we put that into communication that if, I heard, for example, I heard Mayor Ford this morning, when he was asked a question at the press conference about the no eviction policy of the province. He said, don't abuse it. You can pay your rent, Are we going to basically say the same thing to taxpayers if you've got the ability to pay their taxes that you should for the state to community in the sake of our cash flow?
Through you, Mayor Burton, absolutely, we will be doing that. Sorry. Oh, sorry. So the question was, are we going to encourage those that can to pay their taxes for April 30th? And absolutely, we are going to encourage them to do that. We still need to fund our programs and services. We need that revenue. We rely on it. It's the major revenue source for the town. And with our activity revenue basically drying up right now, it really is the only revenue coming in. So if people can pay, we would very strongly encourage them to. That's why we're recommending waiving penalty and interest rather than deferring the due dates.
Okay, and last question is, with respect to what we're doing or what's been proposed today. Just reading the chat from Councillor Rebecca. Nobody hear me? Is that the issue?
Ms. Sully will repeat your question.
Okay,
She can hear you.
Okay. And then I forgot what the issue was.
We should
I'll
perhaps,
defer and I'll come back to it if I can recall what it was.
we should probably reduce our multitasking when we can't,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Give you a second chance to ask your second question if you'd like to go now. Councillor Knoll, did you want to go?
No, I'll my head like recall what it was.
Alrighty then. Councillor Chisholm, you're next. Would you please unmute your mic and pose your question?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just some brief questions, Nancy, and I understand this is always in the moment on what's happening with respect to our finances. With respect, I think the slide said 2.3 million recreation and culture. I assume it includes parks. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Burton, that's correct.
Okay. With that, is there any consideration of senior staff or senior management looking at the possibility of consolidation of some of the facilities where they would whereby close down to reduce their costs and reallocate staff, or even the possibility, I'm going to put it out there, would there be considerations of possible layoffs?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I can't answer the question right now on possible layoffs, but I didn't go into a lot of detail, and I probably should have. We are very closely monitoring this situation. We are looking at our expenditures, and over the next week or so and coming up, we are really going to have to take a serious look at how to reduce our expenditures to offset the impact of the revenue loss. That could include decisions on facility operations, et cetera. The other thing we really have to look at is our capital program. As CIO Closey mentioned, we are looking at it right now from a standpoint of, can we complete these projects? Are they essential? Can we get them done? We also have to look at them from a funding process as well, because a lot of the funding for the projects comes from our operating budget, and with the reduced revenues, that may be one area where we have to actually defer projects going forward. So we are looking at all options right now, but we recognize with the loss of revenue, we have to take a serious look at our expenditures.
Council?
Thanks, Nancy. Just one other quick question with respect to that.
Councillor Chisholm, wait 1 second, please.
Yes.
For the sake of the orderliness of the meeting, could we save next step questions for the next step discussion item at the end of the meeting?
Sounds good to me.
Thank you. So I still have a list, but and Councillor Lischina is next. Is this a next?
Well, I have another question, Your Worship. If
So
you proceed.
Yeah, so you can go ahead, but I would just ask you to keep your questions to the actual motion in front of us. Thank you.
Okay, I'll pass. Thank you. I defer.
All right, same thing, Councillor Lischina, do you have questions about the motion in front of us? That's the only questions that are in order.
Yes, I do. With respect to Nancy's initial comments.
Go ahead.
Can I go ahead? Oh, thank you. Nancy, thank you so much again as well for all of your work through this difficult time. You mentioned about penalty and interest, and eventually residents do have to pay their share of the tax. What's the time frame for these collections? And what happens if they don't meet that timeline? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Burton, we're proposing that we waive the penalty and interest for 2 months. So essentially what we're doing is giving them an extra 60 days to make their payments. The normal tax rules under the Municipal Act are that if a property went 3 years in arrears, that's when they would have to be dealt with. At this point, we're really speaking to the current issues and the difficulty people are facing because of COVID-19.
Thank you, Councillor.
The point is that this could be a long-term effect, so
Councillor,
just,
Councillor, in the next steps item
that's fine.
is
Thank
when
you.
that would be in order. Thank you for your understanding. Councillor Elgar, please unmute your mic and ask any question you have about the motion in front of us. You're still muted.
Councillor Elgar.
Councillor Elgar.
Jeez.
There you go. You are audible.
Hold on.
You are audible now.
Okay. My only question is recommendation number 2. For simplicity, can we change the word commencing May 1st to April 24th? I think there's going to be people say, for that 1 week period, does that mean I still have to pay interest?
Through you, Mayor Burton, the reason it says May 1st is that is when we apply penalties. So our due date is April 24th. In essence, they have a grace period of a few days before the end of the month. And typically anyone who would pay by the end of April wouldn't have penalty or interest applied to their account. So this is
I doubt if anybody knew that. That's my only concern. I just doubt if people would know that, and I know there will be questions asked.
Service Oakville will be able to answer the questions, but April 24th does appear in item number 2.
It does, I see that, but as when you get the, if you read it, the penalty and interest will be waived for 2 months commencing May the 1st. So that was my question on that part, so.
The treasurer's answer is that if a person, first off, one must read the whole thing, not a piece of it. And if you read the whole thing, it's clear. And the communication that we give people will be clear. This is the actual operative resolution that tells staff what to do. So it may be that your concern can be dealt with through proper wording of the news release that we send out and the advisory that we post on the website.
And I'm fine with that. I didn't realize they had an extra week grace period every time. That's all. Fine. No worries. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let's see. The next question is from Councillor O'Meara. Councillor O'Meara, please unmute your mic and ask any question you have about the motion in front of us.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question about how people can defer their property tax if they pay it to the bank on their mortgage.
Through you, Mayor Burton, I think that we can follow up and put some Q&As on the website. But my thought is that they would have to contact the bank in regards to this. I know there have been questions raised about whether banks will still stand in the mortgage payments. A lot of times they pay both installments when the first bill comes out. So it may be too late for anything to happen there.
So will we be letting the banks know that we've done this though? So when they call their banks will say, okay, yeah, that can be done?
Through you, Mayor Burton, that we weren't intending to do that. Most of the banks would have already paid the installments. They typically collect it. They pay both installments on the February due date. There's a very small percentage of ratepayers that actually pay through the mortgage, and my advice would be that they contact their bank if they're concerned about the payment.
Okay, and I say this, I asked this because I was contacted today by somebody who called their bank specifically and said, I understand this is happening, and then the bank said, sorry, too bad. So, I don't know how that's gonna work out.
Well, this is a forward-going measure, and the treasurer has been speaking about the previous collection. This is about how we're treating future from, April 24th. Does that help any?
Yeah, just as long as we've got something posted that residents could print off and bring to the bank and say, we need you to hold these payments or something.
Thank you. That's a suggestion we'll certainly pursue. The next question is from Councillor Sanju. Councillor Sanju, please unmute your mic and ask any question you like about the matter in front of us.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you, Sally. This has been very, very, very helpful, and I know you guys have heard, so we appreciate your time. Just a general question, really. Just wanted to know how much we looked into our neighboring municipalities when we were thinking about potential unallocated referrals. Does this seem to be the consensus in our surrounding areas?
Through you, Mayor Burton, this was the consensus amongst the area municipalities. I know that Milton has a report going on Monday night that recommends basically the same thing that we're recommending, and I believe Burlington is doing the same. Halton Hills did an internal memo to their council, but my understanding is that they're also recommending the same.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
The next question is from Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel. Please unmute your mic and pose your question on the matter before us.
Nancy, in regards to the recommendation, and it may be that I'm a bit confused, but I would like to understand if I'm renting a town property, will I be allowed to defer my rent, my rental payment at all, or is that not covered?
This is not about rent.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Burton, this report speaks specifically to property taxes. We will, any tenants in town facilities that are closed, we will be waiving the rent or refunding if they've paid. But at this time, we're not offering relief to any other renters. So it would only be, and it's not in this report, but if someone is renting space in River Oaks Community Centre and we've closed the doors, we can't then charge them rent because they can't use their space.
So to your earlier comment about posting some FAQs on the website, could we clarify that as well?
Certainly.
My other two questions are in regards to capital and capital projects. Can I just confirm that the community center, Oakville Trafalgar Community Center, is in progress?
Councillor, that's out of order. Would you please hold that question for the item about next steps?
Sure, I'll go to my last question then on this specific one. So number 7 in the recommendation says to allow for an extension of the length of time. Given that we currently have the ability now to have virtual meetings, I'm wondering why that needs to be in there, that we would be convening again from, before the deadline. Is there a need for number 7 to be in there?
Through you, Mayor Burton, when we originally wrote the report, we were thinking there may not be council meetings, and this would be a way that if this continued on to allow us to extend it. But as you said, there are virtual meetings, so it really is up to council if they'd like to strike recommendation 7.
So Mayor Burton, through you, I would like to suggest to my council colleagues that number 7 is not necessary now that we have virtual meetings.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, my first step is to get a mover and seconder. Alphabetically, that would be Councillor Dudek and Councillor Elgar. And raise your hands if you don't wish to be so named. Councillor Elgar does or doesn't. Unmute your mic and make yourself plain, Councillor Elgar. Oh, there you are.
Sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand for that. I actually raised my hand before I heard the whole question.
All right. So you have a question?
the only thing, the moving the recommendation, will we be deleting 7 and what was the other one? We don't need it, and 6? Is that what people want?
The way to be sure is to move it and, as written, and without 6, that would be deleted on staff's recommendation since they wrote the recommendation. But in the interest of efficiency, instead of going through an amendment, Councillor Dudek and Councillor Elgar, would you like to move the motion as items 1 through 5 only?
Yes.
Raise your hands if the answer is yes. Thank you. Councillor Dudek and Councillor Elgar have moved the motion as containing items 1 through 5 only. Is there any objection or vote against that? Madam Clerk, that carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Now, the next item is number 3, the extension of road closures, licenses, and additional sign permits. And this is a report from the legal department. The town solicitor, Doug Carr, is available to address any questions. Are there any questions, or shall I move to the vote? Raise your hands if there are questions. All right. Then proceeding alphabetically, I'm going to rely on the consent of Councillor Giddings and Councillor Grant to be the mover and seconders of this, unless you raise your hand to unvolunteer yourselves. Madam Clerk, the mover and seconder is Councillor Giddings and Councillor Grant. Is there any objection to this measure? Raise your hands if you object. Madam Clerk, the motion is carried unanimously. Council, we now come to item number 4, the Oakville Economic Task Force Action Plan for Business. This is a report from the Economic Development Department, and the Director of the Economic Development Department, Dorothy St. George, is here to give a presentation, after which we'll take questions. And at that time, alphabetically, Councillor Haslett-Thiel and Councillor Knoll would be the mover and seconder. Director St. George, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and good afternoon, councillors. The report before you is an information report, and it's a package of support for businesses that contain actions that are already in place in the community, as well as recommendations that are before you from the Legal Services Department and Finance Department. In response to the COVID crisis, Mayor Burton convened a new economic task force to address business support in the community. And you can see the composition of the team before you on the slides. It's small, so that on purpose, so that we could act quickly, but it is representative of businesses of all sizes. The Chamber has proactively been meeting, and not meeting in person, reaching out to all of their members to get feedback on their situation through this crisis. The task force has also been in touch with the Kerr and Bronte BIAs, with Oakville Place, Visit Oakville, and many other businesses across the town. The feedback from the consultation was that immediate financial help is needed. Businesses are aware that there are other supports in place or being put in place, and these are changing daily from the federal and provincial governments. But the feedback that we received is that those supports are not being rolled out quickly enough, and that businesses need immediate support. With the closure, the provincial closure of non-essential businesses, this situation is exacerbated. So the purpose of this task force is to collaborate with the Chamber of Commerce, with the BIAs, and with the business community to provide the support at a local level, recognizing we have to do that with what's feasible, given the town's financial situation, which you've just heard about. The action plan that was developed to provide support for the business community has a number of items. This slide speaks to the business operations. Property taxes you've heard about, which effectively provides businesses to have a deferral for 2 months of their taxes, and this will address immediately a cash flow situation for them. The waiving of parking fees is already in place, and the town will also be suspending monthly permit fees. Signage is part of the report for legal services, and it provides additional allowances for businesses in the commercial district to have A-frame signs in the town boulevard. And you can see in this slide, the Seasons restaurants provided a creative way to adapt to the COVID crisis. Business license renewals will be extended during the duration of this crisis. And the Digital Main Street program, which you're all aware of, is providing free one-on-one assistance to develop an online presence. We've been getting an increased uptake in those inquiries, and Halton Region Small Business Center has also reached out to us from other businesses in Halton Region looking for online help in this regard. The task force has also received feedback from the business community about the need to keep projects going. It's important for long-term recovery, or long-term economic recovery. And with this in mind, the existing planning and building permit applications are being processed by staff working remotely. These departments are exploring how applications can be received, how new applications can be received and processed. And as Councillor Giddings asked about earlier, building inspections, with regard to building inspections, staff are looking at how they can deliver a modified level of inspections. Information about support is abundant right now, and it can be overwhelming for businesses. There are new details and support from a variety of sources. Economic development staff have provided links to support at federal, provincial, regional, and local levels through newsletters, social media, and on the website. And following this council meeting, this link that you see on the screen will be live on the town's website and will include Oakville's Economic Action Plan. In addition to information regarding support, there are links to federal and provincial departments for companies who are able to respond to the call for emergency products and innovative solutions. And I'd like to applaud some of the local companies like Virox and Astound and Ford Canada who stepped up to increase capacity to supply products. They've retooled and adapted their manufacturing lines to create needed safety items, and they provided engineering resources to help make these innovations happen quickly. The task force will continue to connect with the business community regarding ongoing support and planning for long-term recovery. This is step one in that process. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. Could I have the gallery view again, please? Madam Clerk? Thank you very much. Are there questions for the director? Councillor Knoll, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
And everybody hear me?
You are audible.
Okay, so my question is more of a comment, and that is, I think it's, I'm seeing people pointing their ears again. Is nobody hearing me again?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up from Sean, okay. Speaking as actually somebody trying to operate a business in this town right now, all I can say is that the programs offered at this point, both provincial and federal level, are, as I can best categorize as lipstick on a pig, because they are really not addressing, and Ms. St. George had mentioned the speed of delivery of services, but to SMEs, small and medium enterprises, what they're offering, particularly for those businesses in town that are actually closed by legislation, is not enough. And we are going to see the routing of small business, not just in Oakville, but across this country, unless there's a step up. So I want to say thank you for taking this initiative to all of the team. And I urge you to listen carefully to and seek the guidance from SMEs on this matter. I saw your list of people that are on this task. None of them are currently operating a business where they have to make a payroll and deal with the difficult decisions. So please make sure you're reaching out to those of us in the community that are actually operating a business and working under extraordinary stress, juggling whether or not we're going to be evicted by landlords, how we deal with our employees, how we deal with everything that we built in this community. And I just want to say thank you for taking this step. I don't know a lot of communities that are doing this, so I think it's great. But let's make sure the voice of the actual business community is heard for all of the activities.
Thank you, Councillor. Council, earlier today, I saw correspondence from the Association of BIAs to the federal and provincial governments, telling them essentially what Councillor Knoll just told us. And I have resolved to write a letter on my own behalf to them, seconding and supporting the letter of the BIAs Association. And if there are no other questions, may I have a mover and seconder? Oh, I have assigned a mover and seconder of Councillor Haslett-Thiel and Councillor Knoll to move and second receipt of the Action Plan for Business report by Director St. George. Do I have consent? Is there any objection to the receipt motion? Madam Clerk, the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. I now need a motion from Councillor Lischina and Councillor Longo to move into closed session for the confidential discussion on next steps update from, excuse me, the acting CAO. May I put that vote? Is there any objection to that measure? Madam Clerk, this carries unanimously. Council, we will now have a short pause while staff make sure that we are truly resolving into a confidential session. I estimate that it'll be a good 5 minutes before we're certain. Please don't leave. We do want you to be involved. All right. I now call this meeting back to order after having resolved into closed session for the purpose of dealing with labor relation matters as permitted by the Municipal Act and the procedural bylaw of the town of Oakville. I have a mover and a seconder to receive the confidential verbal update from the acting CAO, the mover being Councillor Robertson and the seconder being Councillor Sanju. Do I see any objection from any member of council? Madam Clerk, the motion is carried unanimously. Council, that completes almost every step we have to do except for the consideration and reading of bylaws. We have bylaw 2020-50 as revised, a bylaw to authorize extensions of road closures, extensions of business licenses, and temporary sign permits in response to the coronavirus COVID-19 emergency, and the 2020-51 bylaw to confirm the proceedings of a meeting of council. Unless there is objection, I will put Councillor Adams and Councillor Chisholm as the mover and seconder respectively. They have assented. Is there any objection to the motion or any vote against? Madam Clerk, the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. You've made great contributions to our discussions, and I think we've made some good decisions on behalf of our community. It continues to be terrific to work with you, and we are adjourned.